Are we on? We're good now? Okay, we're on now. Okay, with it being 6:32, I'd like to call this meeting to order with the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. We will start this meeting out with patron comments. During patron comments, patrons are invited to address the Board of Education. When I call your name, please come to the podium so everyone can hear. The board is interested in the public's concerns and opinions. We do not respond to comments or questions during the meeting. Questions and concerns will be addressed by Dr. Hoven and other appropriate staff members at a later date. Please remember that comments will be limited to 3 minutes each. Per board protocol, comments about personnel matters and remarks about or directed at individual employees or students are not allowed. First up, we have Judy Gambino.
Hello. I'm here to address the board yet again about the mask mandate being forced on our kids. I'm going to try to make it short. 2 days ago, there were emails of Dr. Fauci's that were declassified by the government due to the Freedom of Information Act. You may do your own research to find these online. In the emails, it states that masks do not work for people without symptoms. On page 3027 of these emails, Dr. Fauci's emailing a Sylvia Burwell, and his exact words are, "Masks are really for infected people to prevent them from spreading infection to people who are not infected, rather than protecting uninfected people from acquiring infection. A typical mask you buy in the drugstore is not really effective in keeping out the virus, which is small enough to pass through the material. It might, however, provide some slight benefit in keeping out gross droplets if someone coughs or sneezes on you. I do not recommend that you wear a mask, particularly since you're very low risk location." It also states in the emails that the eyes are a port of entry for the virus, so the masks don't protect you or our children, no matter what, unless you have a full hazmat suit on. And there's no such thing as asymptomatic spread. He said on February 4th, 2020, as a reply to another email, "Error in my statement to you, I meant to say that most transitions occur from someone who is symptomatic, not asymptomatic. I'm really tired, not much sleep these days," is what he said to him. You can go to Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Menards, just about anywhere without a mask, but our kids can't go to school without it. That's crazy. I understand that there's fear and that there's those that feel comfortable with them, but I think that it should be a choice. It's also been proven by the CDC that COVID doesn't live on surfaces, and like they originally thought. You have our children wiping down desks for the student that comes in after them. They're not maids. We, the parents, have had enough of the tactics that the schools continue to push on our kids. Either you fix it where the masks are optional, or we're going to fix it for them. Thank you.
Next up, we have Katie Rash.
Hi, would it be okay if I remove my mask to speak? Okay, I'll leave it on out of respect for others. All right. This evening there had been an agenda item to approve purchase of materials for English One Book Club. I would like to thank Dr. Hoven and several board members for your attention to concerns raised by community members about some materials. It is appreciated that the district reversed course and will not be purchasing the book Fun Home, a family tragicomic by Alison Bechdel. That's Fun Home, a family tragicomic by Alison Bechdel. According to Dr. Hoven, the inclusion of this book in the purchase request was an oversight. For anyone not aware, this book is a graphic novel memoir that includes several images that are inappropriate for minors. These images include oral sex, masturbation, and a cut open male corpse with genitalia fully exposed. I have the book here with me tonight for any adults who would like to see the content. This issue was caught because involved community members were on guard. This was also caught because the book has a high profile due to banned book controversies across the nation. And that is why it surprised me a bit that this was not caught earlier, because it does have a high profile. Dr. Hoven expressed to me that the district is working to ensure better safeguards on content. I and others will be watching for more information about these safeguards as the district announces them, and would encourage other parents to join with me and others to remain vigilant for the protection of our kids. While we generally trust educators, we learned this week a very hard lesson in our community that there are very rarely some educators who willingly choose wrong. This was seen in a news story about a Francis Howell educator. This is not a reflection on the majority of educators or on the administration, but we do need to be very wary. I do think that we need to safeguard against a culture that would allow sexualized material into our classrooms, and I do ask the district to kind of investigate this further, what might have been known by people who placed the order. I'm not making accusations. I just think it's worthy of an inquiry. And I know that there's a lot of controversy about banned books, but it is never appropriate to present sexual content to minors. Never appropriate. I hope we can all agree. Thank you.
Next up, we have Chris Brooks.
Speaking of objectionable content, over the last few board meetings, speakers have waxed poetic about how great the new Black literature and Black history curriculums will be, how they're sorely needed, they're not political, and they'll usher in a new era of educational greatness. Folks, you've been sold a bill of goods. The actual documents show none of that. The emperor has no clothes. Tonight, I will speak to a few of the problems specifically with the Black literature curriculum and reserve the history one for 2 weeks from now. From the beginning, the literature curriculum shows an ideological bias by relying on so-called social justice standards promulgated by the Southern Poverty Law Center, a leftist political organization. These standards focus attention on individuals' immutable characteristics and train students to see things in terms of race, sex, oppression, etc. That these unapproved, agenda-driven standards, not approved by the district, not approved by the state, are used as a basis for this document should be enough by itself to reject it. But worse than that come the course's book selections. For example, one of the books, Between the World and Me, which is an angry and factually deficient screed, refers to the first responders who died on September 11th as follows. I could see no difference between the officer who killed Prince Jones and the police who died there, or the firefighters who died. They were not human to me. Black, white, whatever, they were the menaces of nature. Great, huh? Another book selection, Heavy, contains sexual scenes as well as vulgar language. Here's a sampling. Renata pulled up her shirt, unhooked her bra, and filled my mouth with her left breast. I held my mouth open as wide as I could, hoping not to cut it with my crooked front teeth. I remember praying to God the tang would overpower the pork chop, rice, and gravy smell in my breath. I didn't think Renata would want to stay my girlfriend if I made one of her nipples smell like pork chops, rice, and gravy. Choking on Renata's breasts made me feel lighter than I'd ever felt. After a few minutes, Renata grabbed my penis and said, "Keep it straight, Key, can you keep it straight?" Shakespeare, it's not. We'll skip the later descriptions of sex, group sex, abuse, self-abuse, defamation, the use of the N-word, leftist politics, and other disturbing content in this book. The rest of the books aren't much better, folks. In a rush to be relevant, we've gone off the deep end. Between memoirs that are full of rape, abuse, and incest, and poorly written novels that focus on lecturing about race and privilege, nothing in the list of books provided for this course celebrates anything except for victim status. It's no wonder that the curriculum's first 2 weeks are devoted to group identity therapy and a what's said in Vegas stays in Vegas preconditioning. Erased are decades of actual black literature with value. Absent is the possibility of learning anything other than how much life sucks. The ideological bias of these selections was laid bare by the admission in the webinar that they were selected from Disrupt Texts, a leftist crowdsourced website that seeks to disrupt the Western canon. Folks, this course may be optional, but a crap sandwich is still crap. And in the end, the core problem with this proposed course is nothing to do with the color of its name and everything to do with the content of its pedagogy. It should be removed, replaced, and started over from scratch. Thank you.
Next up, we have Raquel Bam.
Both of my children attended an FHSD where their teachers had immediate access to an advocate who could address their concerns, ask questions, seek solutions 24 hours a day. Your child will sit in a classroom of a teacher who has to wait until after school day to even get a reply to an email, where problems and stress will be allowed to fester for literal hours before acknowledgement. Both of my children attended an FHSD where teachers were a part of the conversation, where their advanced degrees and expert opinions were respected and sought because a variety of perspectives was important. Your child will have teachers who've had their voice marginalized, who may be excluded from committees so the leaders can stack the deck to ensure the desired outcome instead of real solutions. Both of my children attended an FHSD where the most highly qualified teachers around tried innovative strategies, where they were excited to try new things. And all of that put FHSD on a trajectory of constant positive academic growth and achievement. I can't promise that for your child, because I don't believe that the most highly qualified teachers will even want to come here. And the ones who are already here, like me, even when you love your students, love working with your colleagues and your building principals, it's hard to be innovative and creative when you believe your district administration and Board of Education doesn't care what you think. Both of my children attended an FHSD where I dreamed of looking down the hallway and see my daughter teaching science and sponsoring leadership clubs, where I imagined my son teaching history and coaching baseball, where I honestly got a smile on my face because they both worked at Vacation Station and had FHSD emails, just like me, we three Babs. For the first 6 years of my career, I followed my husband around as his retail career moved us from place to place. When I found FHSD, Bryan Middle School, I had found my forever school. Your child will not likely have second or third generation legacy teachers who dream of calling their own children colleagues. We teachers at FHSD will always do right by our students. We will use our skill and expertise to meet their needs and help them be ready for their tomorrows. But it will be harder because this district has chosen to remove the full release of our FHEA president. Without our voice, we don't feel at home anymore. Thank you.
Next up, we have Stephanie Ayers.
Put this down a little bit. Okay, good evening. My name is Stephanie Ayers, and my family is part of the Francis Howell School District. I actually graduated from Francis Howell North in 1994. I have 5 children. 3 have graduated from Francis Howell Central. I have 2 girls at Fairmount Elementary. The district has always fought for my children, and I say fought in past tense because of the unrest that has been forced upon all of these children in the district to this present day. I think you all know by now in regards to the mandates that have been enforced on our children, not only with the masks, but with the way they are now and how they function as the new normal. The masks alone deprive our children of necessary oxygen for the brain needed for critical thinking, critical analysis, conscious awareness. They also depersonalize our children to the point that they think they can no longer speak for themselves anymore. These children have a right to their personal sovereignty. It is getting to the point that we, the parents, will end up making a call to do something drastic when it doesn't need to come to that point. Because of the Freedom of Information Act on June 1st, which Judy already said, Dr. Fauci let's say he was forced to release 3,234 pages of them, to which I will give one excerpt too. On March 31st, 2020, he pulled randomized controlled trial data that stipulates that masks did not work in the community setting to prevent viral respiratory infections, consistent with this null May emergency meta-analysis, which it's online, you can look yourself. So I will move on to my children, who are kept in cohorts when they can breathe, told how they can eat, remove their mask long enough so they can throw something away, then they have to go outside in the fresh air and put their masks back on. They are told which hallways to walk up, which stairways to go down. We cannot attend meetings anymore in person, and my daughter just had an art show, which I could not make because it was online, and that was taken away from her as well. She cannot breathe at night. I've had to keep her home from school to do her breathing treatments. She coughs consistently from wearing a mask 7 hours a day. My daughter yesterday, parent pickup, couldn't breathe. She pulled her mask down as she was sitting in line and was scolded by her teacher's aide, who told her to pull it back up. I will be having words with her by the end of the school year as well, by the way. Then my other one, who needed to blow her nose, was also scolded, telling her she couldn't do so and had to put her mask back on. Do not try to push these experimental vaccines as a stipulation of lifting these mandates either. It will never happen. Again, the research is out there. If you want to go down the rabbit hole, you can. So this is what is going to happen. Either you will lift the mandates and they will be removed. There's enough parents out there behind the scenes. We've already spoken to each other. We will take necessary measures to get the mandates lifted. And if that means that we need to rally up enough parents to sue the school district, we're going to do it. Do what is right and fight for your children. And you can laugh, but we are fighting for your children as well. So you better remember that. Got it? Get it? Good.
Next up, we have Aaron Shetler.
Good evening. This is the first school board meeting I've attended, so I'm a little shocked by some of the patron comments. I would like to read a letter that I sent to all the board members today. I am a parent of one daughter at Cosley Elementary, and I'll just read the letter, and it's about the FHEA president position. I'm writing as a parent concerned about the decision to remove the release time for the FHEA president position, which represents the interests of our wonderful teachers. From what I can see, our teachers have done everything we demanded of them this year, and we sure did ask a lot of them. They risked their health to teach our kids in person all year. They found new ways to teach virtually for families like mine who wanted it. They made the year bearable and managed to teach in unmanageable circumstances. Every day, I'm grateful for my daughter's teachers at Cosley, and I can't imagine having a board that doesn't support its teachers enough to make what seems like a very small contribution to their professional support system. I talked recently about this with a real estate agent friend whose business relies heavily on the quality of our schools. Their firm publicly supported teachers with flashy signs about heroes, but privately, they said a weaker teachers union was better for their business because the board could make more popular decisions during the pandemic regarding in-person school, possible unmasking, etc., without worrying so much about the health and interests of their teachers. I hope this is not true in each of your cases. It's a terrible look for one of the best districts in the region. I spent more than a decade as an education reporter. I learned from experience that while a good bit of discussion and tension are healthy among teachers and administrators, school districts in which the board and teachers union become adversarial unilaterally decline in quality over time. That would be a real shame and would have a negative impact on all residents, especially when it comes to home values. This might happen over the next 10 years or so, but board members making this decision, you will be remembered as the people who contributed to the decline. Wouldn't you rather be remembered as the leaders who maintained and grew the quality of the district for years to come? As a board that attracted and supported great teachers and made the district a place where they wanted to work. During this pandemic, my second grade daughter's teacher delivered homework packages, books, and gifts to each of her students' homes. She recognized the important things that keep things normal for our kids, and by some miracle, she also managed to teach my kid fractions, writing, science, social studies, and computer literacy, both in person and online. My 8-year-old will be better prepared because of my teacher's hard work this year. I know the interests of a district, the board, and the teachers are not always aligned, and that it's a difficult time to be a school board member. But the board should be celebrating and supporting our teachers at every
Thank you.
turn.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Gabby Ayers.
Hello, my name is Gabby Ayers. I think we, aka us kids / adults, should not have to wear masks anymore because the governor Mike Parsons lifted the mask mandate months ago, and my school still has not lifted the dumb mask rule. And I'm sick of not breathing, and I stayed home from school today because I can't breathe, and I have to take an inhaler to help me breathe.
Can I put that down for you?
And I have to take an inhaler to help me breathe, to help me breathe. I feel sick, and fun fact, if you look on the back of a mask box, it says PS, does not protect you from sicknesses or diseases. And do you like masks? Can you breathe in a mask? I don't think so. I just want to be a kid and have things go back to the way they should. After all, children and we have to have a voice. Do you want to wear one? Nope. So we'll stop wearing one. If you want to breathe. Thank you. Hope you learned something. Love, Gabby. If you will, I'll give you a smile.
Good stuff.
Is that on now? Okay. FHEA.
I want to thank you all of the educators, support staff, parents, and students. The work that was done this year was unprecedented. All of you going above and beyond to give all students a great learning experience. FHEA's mission statement: we are committed to protecting, promoting, and advocating for our students, educators, and schools. We strive to ensure that our schools are a safe place where the dignity of students and educators is honored, allowing all of them to learn and grow. This is not something we can do part-time after school. Removing the release time for the president position means you are asking teachers to take on more and more responsibility. Let's talk about transparency. Elliot Davis, about a month ago, interviewed our current superintendent about the deficit that was over $12 million. But now, the budget is in a much better place, even though we have not collected the last 2 rounds of stimulus money. Also, in this proposed budget, they are moving $6 million to capital projects. That makes us have a larger deficit and isn't the norm. Our current superintendent blames previous administration, but in fact, he was a part of the district's negotiations team 3 years ago, and he benefited from those raises, as did everyone in the district. A former board member was also interviewed on the same segment of Elliot Davis because he led the no vote on the last 3 tax levies. A quote from Steve Johnson, the former board member: The most important thing is that the district is listening to taxpayers. Did you trade the teachers' representation for Steve Johnson to support a levy? There are more taxpayers than him. I think taxpayers have said to allow teachers to have the same representation as they have had for the last 26 years. Why aren't you listening to all those taxpayers? Thank you.
Next up, we have FISA.
Good evening, Board of Education, Cabinet, and community members. FISA would first like to thank you for signing and agreeing to our closure document at the last meeting. We would also like to thank Laura Heidenreich and Denise Hall for their years of service to Francis Howell. They have always been professional in their jobs and would help us with whatever requests we had. They will be missed and are hard shoes to fill. Thank you. This brings us to a concern that we do have. Why are there so many support staff leaving the administration building? The majority of them are not retiring, and some excellent employees are being lost to other districts. For those employees that earn vacation time, changing districts often means having less vacation time to start a new job. Is money the reason we are losing so many good support staff, or is it something else? It would be interesting to see the support staff turnover rates for the past 10 years. Lastly, we are wondering if the board's next step is to silence the voice of FISA also. Why do you wish to silence the voice of teachers, which will also hurt the students? Have you been on social media? Parents are terribly concerned about the way the teachers are being treated. Do you think this is a way to get support for a tax levy when your actions are upsetting parents as well as your staff? One board member was a teacher and a principal. Another was a support staff employee. Have you forgotten how much the staff does to keep this district top-notch? Without the teachers and support staff, do you think you would have blue ribbon schools or be ranked so high? Your support is needed to keep our schools top-notch with quality staff. Thank you.
Board, I'd like a motion to approve the agenda for June 3rd, 2021 as presented.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Board, I'd like a motion to approve the May 20th, 2021 Board of Education regular business meeting minutes as presented. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Now we'll turn this over to Dr. Hovind.
Thank you, Ms. Lang. At our last board meeting, you had a work session on the preliminary budget for next year, and tonight it comes in front of you for a first reading. Before we do that, I just wanted to take a minute to do a brief overview of the budget from a superintendent perspective. So Mr. Supple and I talk a lot about the budget and the official documents and all of the things that really go into such a large budget. And then I try to take it and put it into a summary that works better from my point of view as far as just hitting the highlights of it. And so what I'm going to show you tonight isn't the official budget documents. This is a description from my point of view of what I think really just hits the key points of the budget. So the first thing is to talk about the revenue summary in the budget. So it includes $6 million in relief funds. So one of the questions that we've been asked is, what about those ESSER funds, and should they be put in the budget? We haven't claimed them yet. So we did take part of that allocation for next year and put it into the budget with the intent of, once we identify what all those uses would be, that would be money that you would see show up into our budget. So from a revenue perspective, we included $6 million in relief funds, which is, again, just an estimate. We haven't claimed those funds yet, which makes it look like the initial budget shows an $8 million increase in revenue. So without that relief money, so just thinking of the normal operating revenues that come in, not talking about the one-time relief money, it's really just over a $2 million increase is what we're showing in revenues for next year. Again, the revenue, the stimulus money that's coming in, that relief money, is going to be offset by expenditures matching the amount. So in the overall budget, it's not going to make a difference in the ending deficit or surplus that we're going to experience. But again, about a $2 million increase without that relief money. Similar story on the expenditure side. So the budget that you saw during the workshop showed a roughly flat. It was really a decrease of $358,000 in that budget, but that did include putting $6 million of expenditures from that relief money into the expenditures. So again, without that, it actually is a budget that shows a decrease of just over $6 million. So when you think about the staffing cuts and the other cuts to programs and other things that we had to do for next year, that really is leading to a lesser expenses next year of about $6 million. Again, the budget you saw during the workshop showed it to look closer to a flat expenditure summary. And so when you think about it again, that $6 million is offset by the revenue. So independent of that, we should see a decrease of about $6 million in expenditures. So one of the things I did for you last summer is I showed you kind of some quick math. So for me, how do we just kind of make sense of all of this? And so I thought the easiest way to do that tonight would be to show you what we came into last year facing, the purposeful things that were done to lead to a better outcome than the original projection, and how that impacts us and how that compares to this coming year. So last year, we started the year with a large projected deficit, and at the revised budget time, we were still projecting a deficit of about $12.2 million. What we did talk about last year was all of the cuts we could make throughout the year to reduce that, and it was alluded to earlier tonight during the comments. We really did end the year through those efforts with a much better ending balance, but we told you about that last summer. We did really anticipate that would happen. So coming into this year, as I just said on the last two slides, we project an increase in revenue of about $2.2 million. We do expect a decrease in our expenditures of $6.4 million. Those are what are projected in the budget. So if you look at last year's deficit of 12.2, take those differences this year, the increase in revenue, the decrease in expenditures, and we are now projecting a deficit of only $3.6 million in that initial budget. So what Mr. Supple presented last time did project that $3.6 million deficit. I just wanted to give you a quick idea of why that makes sense based on all the purposeful things we did last year. Those cuts through staffing, those cuts through other curriculum writing, release time, travel, some of those things that we cut they really showed good dividends in our end result, and you can see this year how big of a difference those will make. The last two lines there, these don't show up in the budget because they're not projected precisely, but every year we can expect some underspending in accounts across the district, and those typical differences that do show up, money that was allocated but not spent. In a typical year, that ends up being somewhere in the range of $5 million. And so the projected documents showed a $3.6 million allocation, but in the end, with these underspendings and those accounts across the district, we really project to see a small surplus next year. So not large, but getting to balanced or a little bit above that is what a realistic projection looks like coming into this next year. Big picture, what does that mean for us? So last summer, about this time, we presented a 2-year plan to get our budget back on track. And if you remember, in the first year, we said we would make as many cuts as we could during the year, but we did not cut staffing positions that late in the process. We did say that going into the next year, we would look at staffing cuts as well as maintaining some of the other cuts that we had made. And so this is year 2 of that plan, the budget that's being presented for you. Again, with the typical underspending in those accounts, we do expect it to be balanced or a small surplus. While this is good news, there are still a couple details to note. So a lot of the cuts that were made during the year have to continue in order for us to continue to see this budget reach this level. Unfortunately, those are not things that we can really sustain permanently. So at some point, those cuts that we've made need to come back. We can't permanently stop rewriting curriculum. We can't permanently stop some of the professional development costs and travel costs. So those are not permanent solutions. And then as well, the other increased costs that we want to be able to see going forward. We want to give our employees steps. We want to give our employees raises. We want to see some of our other programming increase in ways that will cost additional money. So while we do have a projection this year of a balanced budget or a little bit more than that as an end result, That's not a final answer for us. We still need to look at other ways to help us move forward in the ways that we really want to be able to move forward, which will require additional revenue for us and additional cuts in order to move forward in the ways that we want to. So that's a summary of what I see as kind of the key points of the budget. Any questions? And the questions may be for Mr. Supple or for me on any of this.
Mr. Supple. I don't know. There we go. It was mentioned today that we have $3 million in a Superintendents Fund. Could you maybe speak to that to clarify what is that?
Laura, there's a document that's attached to board docs. It was the PowerPoint from the work session that was presented on May 20th. Could you bring that up? And I think if we go to like page 4 or 5. Yeah, up, and look at the, no, further, past that one, over expenditure items of note. So, Mrs. Walker, to your question here, at the budget work session, I did share with the board and the community that in the purchase services portion of the budget that we had allocated $3 million, that's a placeholder for the federal stimulus dollars that Dr. Hoven spoke about. So we've included a total of $6 million in the budget. $3 million of that, roughly, is going to be used to fund the one-time stipends for all of our staff members. And then there's $3 million that we are going to be very careful, and I spoke to this at the work session, that we're going to follow the guidance from DESE and from the U.S. Department of Education. We're going to have conversations within our community here to make informed decisions about how to best spend those one-time dollars. So we don't have those completely allocated yet, but the placeholder is there so that when we make decisions about how to spend them, it's already included in the budget. And so, yes, for right now, that sits in the superintendent's account because it was the best place to keep track of it for right now. Once specific decisions are made, it'll be moved to the appropriate departmental or building budget so that it can be spent from the appropriate location. And Laura, since we're here, if we could just scroll up a little bit and the fund balance slide, bring that into full focus. So I would want to point out here, just qualify some comments that were made earlier. Yes, I think we are ending fiscal year 21 better than we thought, but it's still a $5 million deficit, meaning we spent $5 million more than we brought in. Is that better than a $12 million deficit? Yes, but I want to make sure that people don't take the wrong impression away. Better is better, but I think there are degrees there. We're still deficit spending this year.
Thank you.
Board, any other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hoven and Mr.
Yeah,
Supple.
just real quick, sorry. It took a second to get it on. I didn't know, Kevin, if you could speak to the $6 million that was moved from capital, I'm sorry, from one fund to the capital fund. So I believe that was mentioned earlier, but we spoke about it in multiple different past meetings, but it might be worth mentioning again.
I'd be happy to, thank you. We have always budgeted a transfer from the operating budget to the capital fund. We don't always have to make that transfer. It depends upon what actual projects are completed and the timing of that happening. It's a conscious decision. We could choose to levy a larger amount directly into the capital projects fund. The downside of that is that if you don't need it all in that current year, it has to remain in the capital fund. You can't transfer it back out. So we keep all of our flexibility in the general fund by levying a greater amount there, and then we transfer what's necessary to actually cover our expenditures. I've shared this, as you said, Mr. Ziegemeier, on several occasions, but those, in fact, talked about it at the budget work session last meeting. those expenditures cover a lot of things. It's the regular operating type of work that needs to take place in a district of our size. So repairing sidewalks and doing minor roof repairs and replacing some of the fan motors in large HVAC units and so forth. That's the type of work that takes place in addition to purchases of some of our instructional technology is considered capital expenditure, and so it comes out of the capital fund. The lease of our buses comes out of the capital fund. Those are all expenditures that we regularly occur in the general operations of the district. And so I believe that keeping the greatest flexibility by keeping the majority of our levy in the general fund and transferring only what's necessary is important. Over time, there was a point in time several years ago when the capital fund by itself maintained a greater fund balance. And so there was less of a need to transfer on an annual basis. Well, just the nature of things over time, that fund balance became smaller and smaller. And so there's a greater need on an annual basis to transfer to cover those normal operating expenditures.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, if we overfund the capital fund, we can't take that money out and use it someplace else.
Correct.
So we put as much as we can into the general fund and only what's necessary in the capital fund, and we will fund out of the general fund just to fulfill those needs on a yearly basis.
That's correct.
And so can you just give me a couple examples of what's in the general fund, what expenditures are in there, that why we need the flexibility?
Well, the four major funds are the capital fund, the debt service fund. I can dispense of those pretty easily. I think we have an understanding of capital. We've just had that discussion. Debt service pays the principal and interest on our bonds. We have a separate levy dedicated to our debt service. So that remains the general fund and the teachers fund. So we do levy about half of what of our operating levy goes into the teachers fund that pays for teacher salaries and benefits. That's restricted by statute to those reasons. The general fund pays for everything else: lights, water, gas, insurance, paper, pencils, everything. And so we pay for most of our expenditures, other than teacher salaries, out of the general fund.
So just to summarize again, if we overfund the capital fund, we can't use those monies anywhere else.
That's right. They would not be available for teacher salaries or other staff salaries or some of the other regular day-to-day things that we need to do.
Any other questions, board? Thank you, Mr. Supple and Dr. Hoven. Next up, we have a first reading on our curriculum review. Any questions, comments, board?
I know that we typically will review these in 2 weeks, but due to the fact that there's a lot of material here and we've been, or at least I've been, I think most of the other board members have been involved with the 500-page budget, could we delay the second reading on these two courses until the meeting in July?
Yeah, that'd be no problem. We'll save both curriculums, and then we'll bring the materials that go with them. We'll hold that until the July meeting as well.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else, board? Okay. I would like a motion to approve the consent agenda for June 3rd, 2021 as presented. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Board, I would like a motion to approve the purchases over $7,500 as presented.
So moved.
Any discussion, board?
I do have one question. Mr. Supple, I noticed when on some of the purchases over $7,500, there was quite a lot of money that was going towards computers, MacBooks. I saw that some of it was going toward the alternative learning department, but also there was quite a bit of money spent for other things. Are we as a district looking forward to going to one-on-one? Is that why that was purchased, or was it for a specific reason?
Mrs. Stiglich, at this point, what we're able to do is to replace those devices that have reached end of life. So we really aren't adding to the overall number of devices available for students. We're only replacing the ones that are no longer serviceable. So oftentimes Chromebooks will reach end of life, and Mac or iPads have a little bit longer life, but they're also, so to your point with some of the special ed, we found that some of our iPads were no longer able to upload the apps that the students need to be successful. So these are replacing devices currently in use for ones that have reached end of life. We are not increasing the total number of devices, so this is not an initiative to begin to move us closer to one-to-one. We hope to just maintain the same number of devices that we currently have.
Thank you.
Anyone else, board? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Board, I would like a motion to approve the revision to the 2021-2022 school year calendar as presented.
Second.
Any questions? Discussion, board? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Board, I would like a motion to approve the 2022-2023 school year calendar as presented.
Second.
Any questions, comments? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Board, I would like a motion to approve the update to mask protocols as presented and to allow the superintendent to make changes to protocols as the situation dictates moving forward. Second. Dr. Hoven.
Thank you. I've got a quick presentation I'm going to go through with you. As we promised earlier, actually last summer, as we were setting our back-to-school plans, one of the things that we did commit to is that as the year went on, we would respond to changes in guidance working with our local health department. Our local health department also works on guidance from the CDC and other organizations, and that we would also keep an eye on our internal data and determine when and if updates to that could be made. So examples would be, late last summer, we did change our mask protocols, initially requiring masks for third grade and up, and then ultimately for all of our students. Later, we went from standard quarantines to modified quarantines. So we do have examples throughout the year of showing how we made updates when we had the guidance to support that, and we're able to do so. So tonight I'm here to ask your approval of some new mask protocols for the coming weeks and talk a little bit about next school year. So first, I just want to point out what the current St. Charles quarantine rules continue to be. So we still have, close contact, we've talked about this all year. Close contact is defined as individuals who are within 6 feet of a confirmed positive individual for 15 or more minutes. Without masks, close contacts are required to undergo a full standard quarantine, which is currently 10 days. So at the beginning of the school year, that was a lot of our kids and a lot of our staff going home. At the time, it was 14 days. And so a lot of people missing a lot of time in our buildings. Once we got to the modified quarantines, the guidance became if we had a mask mandate and could identify that both the close contact and the positive cases were masked, then we could switch to modified quarantines, which allows the individuals to stay at school. So if it's a student, they can continue attending. If it's an adult, they can continue reporting to work. And so we switched over to that. What still happened was that if the contact was at lunch or in some other situations where masks weren't worn, people did still get standard quarantines, continued to happen. So we need to be aware that as we talk about any changes, relaxing a mask mandate does potentially remove the option of modified quarantines in some situations. Let's talk a little bit about what our reality has been. So the left-hand chart here talks about our positive cases. So this is combining students and staff. You can see in December, we had 349 positive cases that month, and you can see a really nice decline down to where we are now. April ended up a little higher than March. Remember, March had a spring break week, which really gave us a chunk of time with no positive cases reported in our buildings because they were home. But you can see when you get to May, the number, it's a nice trend, but it's not gone. In fact, we got a call today about another positive case, so they are still happening. The number is way down. We are still experiencing both positive cases and resulting quarantines. The right-hand chart here shows the numbers of quarantines, and you can see the chart breaks up by modified and standard. So back in December, over 2,000 modified quarantines and another almost 800 standard. So thinking about it, that modified, that left-hand column, all of those students and staff were able to stay at school because of our mask mandate. So, several thousand individuals stayed at school, and if you think of the combined numbers of days and the combined days and hours of instruction that were maintained because of our mask mandate. Again, though, you see a great trend. You see the numbers going way down, but not gone. So we still do have a low level of cases that do occur in our buildings. At the very bottom, you can see a couple of notes there. Only 2 new cases in the last 14 days, and which means our 14-day rolling average is 0.2. So we really, even in the last couple of weeks, have seen even a greater decrease in what we've been facing. So as a result, I would ask the board tonight to consider some new protocols here, but I also want to talk about what the potential consequences of those decisions are. So for summer school and summer activities, our recommendation is to continue to require masks in classrooms, and that is consistent with our other neighbors in the county. This will allow us to continue to use modified quarantines when it comes to students and teachers in our classrooms for summer school. So those individuals would be able to stay at school if we have that mask mandate in place indoors in classrooms. Additionally, we would like to relax the mask mandate and make them optional for all outdoor activities. So this does eliminate the ability to take advantage of modified quarantines if individuals are outside and in close contact. However, we've been watching our data, we've been keeping an eye on those trends, and we have experienced very minimal close contacts in our outdoor settings. So even independent of the differences of outdoors and indoors, we just know that we see very few close contacts when it comes to outdoor activities. So the recommendation is that when it comes to outdoor activities throughout the summer, that masks become optional. Talking about our summer employees, so all of our staff who work year-round or those who come in during the summer, that the recommendations for those adults, we make masks optional when they are not working directly with students. We would still require masks, as we said on the last slide, for those individuals working directly with students. Adults have been eligible to get vaccines for some time now, and so many of our adults are fully vaccinated or could be if they chose to be. We also know that the current rules now around fully vaccinated individuals is that you are eliminated from needing to quarantine, and they no longer have a time limit on that. For a while, your reduction of quarantine was only good for 90 days. At this point, they've lifted that, and it's an indefinite period of time. If you're fully vaccinated, you do not have to quarantine. So combining the fact that we do not have to quarantine fully vaccinated individuals, along with the low numbers of cases, makes it an extremely low likelihood of seeing any COVID spread in those situations. In classrooms, though, because many of our students still cannot be fully vaccinated, we want to protect their ability to stay in the classroom. It's not an outdoor, out in the sun, not those kinds of settings, and so we do feel it's important to keep the modified quarantine in place by having that mask mandate indoors, even for our adults who are working directly with students. The big question that we hear a lot about is, what about next year? And right off the bat, we're just not ready to make a firm recommendation yet. We still have the same quarantine guidelines that we have had for some number of months now. The CDC, we've heard conversation that they may change their guidance for schools, but as it stands, the recommendation is still that students wear masks in schools. We are going to keep an eye on that. Middle and high school students will all have the opportunity any student 12 and up could be fully vaccinated by the start of school. We do highly encourage eligible students to get vaccines, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. At this point, we anticipate that we will still be required to contact trace around positive cases and identify students and staff who are in close contact. And we, at this point, again, anticipate that we will still have quarantine rules. And so those things will all weigh into our decisions, both what the quarantine rules are and the numbers of cases we anticipate having to work through. I will say it out loud and publicly, it is our hope that we will be at a mask optional state for next year. That is what I hope to be able to report. Going back to the vaccine question, I would like to just still encourage anyone eligible to get the vaccine, because even if we go mask optional, if there are still quarantine rules, the only way those people will not have to go home if they're close contacts is if they're fully vaccinated. So if we keep a mask mandate, we could keep them at school, but the only other way is for people to be fully vaccinated. So I do highly encourage people who are eligible to do that. So again, it is our hope. We are not able to make that statement yet. We will come back to the board and announce publicly as soon as we are able to make a firm declaration of our plans for next year. So what questions can I speak to?
So I guess the first question I have is, who sets our quarantine and contact tracing?
Sure. So the quarantine rules that we follow come from our county health department, and they will often look at guidance from the CDC, but we are bound to working with our county health department. So we work closely with them. A lot of questions came up over the last month about who sets the mask mandates, and we do set our own mask mandate, but it is in response to the quarantine rules that we are needing to follow. And the only way we could follow the modified quarantine rules was to have the mask mandate. So it really is, the end result is a combination of the two. The county has the ability to set the quarantine rules, and then we get to respond with our choices within our district to best work with those rules.
So they haven't updated any guidance since November in St. Charles County. Our health department has not. Is that correct?
Around quarantines, correct. They made that shift in November to the modified quarantines for schools, and that is still in place. They did shorten the quarantine during that window as well, and that was after November.
Okay. And so are we mandated to do the contact tracing or issuing quarantines on the health department's behalf?
Yes, so we are required to identify close contacts and report those to the health department.
Thank you.
Okay.
I can probably talk loud enough so everybody can hear anyway, but I just wanted to verify, I believe that you said that this is in sync with the other districts in the county. They're all doing pretty much the same thing as we are throughout.
So the other districts in the county, to my understanding, are still requiring masks for summer school. A couple of our neighboring districts have said they have a goal of being mask optional for next school year, which is in line with what we have said as well. That's what we would like to see happen. It's our hope. No one in our county has yet to declare a mask optional state for next school year, but we would all like to see that be the outcome.
I do have one. So in regards to the quarantines, we're not quarantining them from the district standpoint. The county health department is who is the lawful authority of quarantines and their requirements, correct?
Right, so we identify the close contacts. We cooperate with our health department, but the quarantine is their authority. We help identify which students and staff are close contacts and therefore need to be quarantined. So we do work with them to carry it out, but it is their authority.
But they base their quarantine requirements on masks as well, correct?
Correct. The modified quarantine is only a possibility if we have masks. So when we go back to that slide on that data, that entire left-hand column of the right chart, all of those students and staff would have had to go home for a full standard quarantine if we did not have our mask mandate. So even as late as May, over 200 individuals would have had to spend time at home in the month of May if we didn't have our mask mandate.
So just to give you some context with the modified quarantine, since that change was put in place at the end of November, because we did have the mask mandate in place, 4,800 students student cases would have been on standard quarantine who are allowed to be modified. That worked out to about 4,500 different individual students. So when you look at that, 48,000 days of instruction were saved. Students were allowed to be in class. That's the equivalent of just under 300 students missing an entire year of school. So because that mask mandate was in place at that time, it allowed us to keep the students here. So we recognize at this point making that change, we lose that modified quarantine option based on some of these changes, but because the numbers are lower with the positivity rate and the level of spread, we believe now is the right time to make that decision.
And so you spoke to about hope that next school year, that it's optional. I think everybody on the stage probably hopes for the same thing. So I look forward to hopefully that happening. In regards to having mask mandates inside the school building, if there were to be an outbreak, as of right now, the health department would still require quarantines. And if we didn't have the mask mandate, then we would see larger numbers of students who are in summer school to help build some deficits go home and not
Correct.
be able to be in person.
Correct. Under our current guidelines during summer school, with the recommendation tonight, we would still be able to take advantage of that modified quarantine for any close contacts that happen in our classes during summer school. And so by keeping that in place, those students will be able to stay at school if their close contact occurs in the classroom. Now, it does say if they're outside, we wouldn't be able to take advantage of that, but we are comfortable that in reviewing our data, it is rarely the case that we are identifying any close contacts happening outside. So while we do give up the modified quarantine for outside contacts, we really don't anticipate that becoming an issue at all.
One more question, might be a little bit premature, but so if we go masks optional and the quarantine rules are still the same, will we be providing our staff with COVID leave and things the way that we have been? I just want to make sure that everybody is protected.
Sure. I think the balancing act we will have to follow this whole time is an understanding of what the rules are in place for us, what the consequences of our choices will be. So if we chose to be mask optional and the quarantine rules are still in place and we had a reasonably high number of cases, we would be sending a lot of people home that we could have kept here if we had mask mandates. So we will have to balance what we're seeing as far as numbers in our community. Right now, they're extremely low. We anticipate them staying extremely low. And so therefore, even mask optional, even with quarantine rules, we wouldn't expect to see a lot of people being sent home. But it is still a possibility under the current rules. If the quarantine and contact tracing rules change and we're no longer required to quarantine, or the guidance changes and it's more around vaccines and is around masks, or vaccines are lowered to younger ages, all of that is subject to change for us. The other side of it is true as well, though. One of our neighboring districts had to shut a school just about a month ago. So while we were ramping up conversations about whether or not masks were still required, we still saw a building had to close down because of a number of COVID cases. So it's still real. It is still a possibility. That school had, my understanding was about 50% of their student population was home, either positive or quarantined, and another 20% were at school still, but modified quarantine. So something like 70% of the students in that building were either positive or exposed to COVID. And so that will matter too. Whatever we decide going forward, this could even happen in summer school, if we were to get a high number of cases in a building, and that's part of why this recommendation is asking to still let me make timely decisions if the situations arise. If something comes up and we have a bunch of cases, we need to be able to react and potentially put masks back on people or something like that. The other is true too. If the CDC recommends masks no longer required, and then our health department comes forward with new changes to quarantine rules, that we're able to respond when those things happen as well.
I have a question. In here you recommend beginning June 9th, masks will be optional for all adults when they are not working directly with students. What is your recommendation for board meetings, other meetings, trainings, where it's strictly just adults?
Sure. Anything that is just adults, our recommendation at this point is that masks would be optional. Adults, for the most part, are eligible to get vaccines. Many of them have. We also, in general, are able to set up our meetings with adults to be spaced enough that people wouldn't typically be identified as close contacts anyway. And so the combination of the spacing we can offer, the vaccines that are out there, and the very low numbers of cases that we're seeing, we feel that it is a safe recommendation at this point.
Great, thank you. Anything else, board?
Thank you, Dr. Hoven, and thank you, Dr. Rumpus, for sure, for all your hard work on that this year. I know that it changed every single day, and we really appreciate everything you did for us and keeping our kids and teachers safe.
What? Sorry. Okay, anything else, board? All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we will now begin our work session on employee benefit plan. Mr. Supple?
Thank you, Mrs. Lang. Tonight, we're going to provide information to the board about the work that the Insurance Committee has done this year. I'd like to, we'll talk a little bit about the process. The plans that we'll be specifically discussing are the Employee Assistance Program, our Family Dental Program, and then talk about our self-funded medical program. I'd like to first take just a moment to thank the members of the Insurance Committee. This is hard work because the topics are difficult. I would especially like to thank Erin Poggi. She's been married since this slide was created, but Erin is our benefits manager and leads out this work, and she does a great job, so thanks to her. Thanks to our two board members, and we had several representatives from FHEA, a FISA representative, and a couple of representatives at large. We do provide opportunity for retirees to continue to participate in our insurance programs, and so we do have a retiree representative, and we've been able to invite our transportation folks to send a representative as well. So our process is to take a look at what coverages are due for renewal. We typically bid those out every 3 years. We try to space those out so not too much is happening in any one year. We send those out to market. Our consultant, MMA, Marsh McLennan St. Louis, helps us with all of that process. We get the responses, analyze those, we bring that information back to the Insurance Committee, and together we develop our recommendations that we'll bring to the board. So the first program I'd like to talk about tonight is our Employee Assistance Program. So we have a very high utilization of this program, so it's not just individual counseling sessions, but you can get advice on financial planning, estate planning, elder care. There are a lot of topics that are available. And again, our employee group makes very good use of this benefit, so congratulations to them for taking care of themselves. We received 6 proposals. Personal assistance services is our incumbent, and you can see who the others are. We've settled on having additional information shared with the committee from our 2 finalists, and that was PAS, our incumbent, and then E&I Next Gen. The other 4 were not moved forward because their pricing was too high. And both PAS and E&I Next Gen, they were comparable on pricing. We do have a ranking system that we use. These are the metrics, the criteria that were selected for consideration. I would point out here, because it will play into our conversation as we move towards the recommendation, that in terms of network strength, EAP, the PAS, which is our current vendor, received a 5 out of 5 rating on that, and their total score was 3.95, and we weight those scores based on the relative contribution of those various criteria. E&I Next Gen, this is their score. Their total score was 3.0, but what I would point out is that on network strength, their score was only a 1. So they don't have as broad a network within the St. Louis area as PAS does, and we felt that the potential disruption for our employees who may establish relationships with particular counselors or other individuals operating through PAS, that would be a negative impact on the program. So this is a little bit hard to read, but I'll try to share the information as best I can. So we have currently about 2,500 employees who are eligible for benefit coverage, and that's how we calculated all of the rates here. Our current rate with PAS is $1.40 per employee per month. Their renewal for the next 3 years would be $1.60 per employee per month. E&I's proposal was $1.33 per employee per month. And so E&I's proposal would be a little, just over $2,000 less than what we're currently paying, and PAS's proposal would be a little over $6,000 more than we're currently paying. So it's about $8,000 if you want to think of the delta there to remain with PAS. But given the strong utilization that we have with our current vendor and the fact that the network is much broader within PAS than within E&I, the committee believed that it was best to stay with our current vendor. And so as we move forward, the recommendation would be to remain with PAS. They had the higher overall score. There wouldn't be any disruption. That network, as I spoke about, they continue to offer unlimited counseling sessions, which has been very important for our participants. They really have a specialty for Missouri school districts, so that's great. And in the overall scheme of our benefits program, the $6,000 or $8,000, however you'd like to think of that difference, is relatively minimal for maintaining what is a very highly utilized benefit by our employees. I want to transition now to a discussion about family dental. So there are some very minor changes to our family dental program. It's a very unique program. It's the somewhat of a one-off that's offered just for Francis Howell School District. And so for single coverage and for employee and family coverage, those rates did not change for next year. Employee spouse and employee children, the rates did increase slightly there. You can see both of them increasing somewhat less than 1%. So relatively minor changes in the rates for the plan, and the co-payments that are required would remain the same as currently. So no other benefit changes. Really the only change would be a slight increase in the premium rate for employee plus spouse and employee plus children. Now we're going to transition to a discussion about our medical program. We are self-funded for our medical program. J.W. Terrell, also now known as Marsh McLennan St. Louis, is our consultant on the education, on the insurance side, and they do a lot of the work for us as it relates to evaluating our plan. So they take a look at how we performed year to date. They project that out for what our future claims would be, and then we try to determine what the premium rates or benefit changes that might be necessary in order to keep the program appropriately funded. We do take a look at our reserve level and try to maintain that at the appropriate point, and all of those factors play into the determination of what we need to do relative to both our premiums and to the board contribution. So we did take a look again with the where we are currently with our reserve account, what we need on a go-forward basis in the reserve account, and then how can we, if necessary, talk about those things that would, the levers that we can pull to get to that point. So we could make changes to our overall benefit structure, those plan changes. We could increase our premiums. We could increase our board contributions, some combination of those three things. And as we have those conversations, we eventually develop a recommendation that is what we're bringing forward to the board tonight. So MMA, St. Louis, did this work for us. Our current reserve balance at the time this was done was about $5.7 million. We know that this year we project that between the board contribution, the employee out-of-pocket contributions, the COBRA participants, the retirees who participate in our plan, will generate about $27.7 million in funding this year. And so our funding plus our reserve is about $33.4 million. As we look forward, we think that next plan year's expenses would be just shy of $30 million, and we'd require about $4.5 million for a reserve. So we would need about $34.4 million. And so the gap between those two is $982,000. So we needed to figure out how we would fill that gap. We do have a regulation that is in place right now that dictates how we provide the board contribution. We've shared this every year when we make this presentation. It's just provided as basis for how we arrive at some of our amounts. But so the board policy talks about the annual single employee premiums, that the district contribution should be enough to allow an individual to get the base medical, the low dental, and the vision coverage, and that's would determine what the board contribution is for an individual. So again, we know that we need to raise about $982,000, and that would require about a 4% increase, but it doesn't play out exactly that way. I'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. So these are the proposed medical premiums. I don't want to necessarily spend a lot of time on this slide. I think we have a slide coming up that is a little bit more informative in terms of what our proposal is. And so these are our district contributions. And what our process was this year is recognizing that we would not have a large increase in salary for our employees, that in this year the decision was made to not increase the out-of-pocket expense for our employees for their insurance coverage. So our goal was set a little bit differently. We took a look at how we needed to change our premiums to generate the revenue necessary to appropriately fund the plan, and then we adjusted the board contribution so that the net effect was a zero or as close to zero as possible for employees in terms of their out-of-pocket expense. And so that is shown here in this chart. I will share, I probably shared this with the board on previous occasions, but it's good to know. We've chosen some examples here, but there are literally hundreds of combinations, but these are fairly representative of what the program is able to do. So if you select the consumer-driven plan, now this is for individual coverage, if you select the consumer-driven plan, there's no out-of-pocket expense irrespective of whether you get the low dental, the high dental, whether you take vision, et cetera. The same is true for our base plan. In fact, the anomaly that kind of developed this year with the way that we did our goal search for creating the board contribution is that actually their out-of-pocket costs for that particular combination in the middle, which is the base medical, family dental, and vision, they would see a $90 a year, for the whole year, a $90 reduction in their out-of-pocket. And then even for the high plan, a very minimal change, only 18 cents a month. But again, for the whole year, only a $2 reduction in their out-of-pocket expense. Now, the board does provide, probably beyond the strict reading of policy, contributions that allow, that are increased in recognition of family enrollment. So we have a different contribution rate for employee plus spouse, a different board contribution for employee plus children, and a different contribution for employee plus family. And so when we take a look at those rates again, taking what they out, this is again out of pocket for these certain combinations of benefits, but within the consumer-driven plan, any of the choices that are up there, their premiums would, their out-of-pocket expense would decrease by $4.30 for the full year. So, you know, almost exactly even. Even more so with the base plan, their out-of-pocket would decrease by 20 cents. So probably not noticeable, but again, no increase for them. And even for the high plan, during the course of the entire year, about a little over $10 decrease. So again, our goal was to continue to offer the same benefit program and to not increase the out-of-pocket expense for any of our employees. We do intend to renew our agreement with CARE ATC. They are the vendor who manages our near-site clinic. We continue to have very, very positive response to the clinic. People love to take advantage of that. We are waiting on the final documents from CARE ATC, but we'll bring that recommendation to the board at a later date. So, but our intention is to continue to offer the clinic program and to do so through CARE ATC. And so, just in summary, these are the recommendations for the Employee Assistance Program, that we would remain with personal assistance services. Family dental program would remain with those very minor changes that I spoke about. And then the medical side, our premiums are increasing by 4%. And in order to get the out-of-pocket cost to remain flat for employees, a district contribution is increasing by an average of about 5.7%. But again, the idea is that we would generate that $982,000 that would be necessary to appropriately fund the program. But there would be no increase in employee out-of-pocket cost based on this presented recommendation. And I think I do have another presentation, but before I move into some of those statistical things, I just wanted to stop here, see if there's any aspect of this presentation that I could answer questions for the board.
Is that on now? Okay. I just want to reiterate a couple of things that I know you've said it numerous times, but the Employee Assistance Program is costing us more dollars.
Yes.
And how much of that are we passing on to the teachers and staff and employees of the district?
None.
And we're paying a significantly higher amount for medical premiums.
Yes.
For individuals and for families.
Yes.
Families with a spouse or whatever. How much of that increase are we passing on to our employees, our teachers, and staff?
None.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that everyone was quite aware of that.
Laura, there's another PowerPoint presentation. If you could pull that one up, please. No, it should look like this, Laura.
while they're working on that, Mr. Supple, I do have another question.
Yes.
So it's about $1 million a year additional that we are contributing to the
Yes.
benefits. So does that averages out to what, close to about $400 per employee that we're contributing additional this year? Is that about what it equals?
I didn't do the math, but not unreasonable. There certainly would be, there certainly is additional cost to the district that is being taken on so that employees are not realizing any additional cost for their coverage.
Outstanding, and thank you to everybody on the insurance committee for making those suggestions.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Lang, as you know, this has been a busy week and a busy day, so we've all been scrambling with things. I did get this to Laura a little bit late in the day.
You can enjoy the quiet for a minute.
All right, here we go. Great. So our consultant has put together some information that I thought it would be good to share some context around how our plan is performing relative to some national benchmarks. And so this is some trend data that is available and shows that the bottom line here is that it starts with year 2012-13 and moves forward. And so that very first line is how much are we spending per employee per year? And so in 12-13 that was $9,500, and today it's $11,770. And so our income is just below that. How much do we generate per employee per year through board contributions or other contributions? And that has stayed pretty consistent with what our expense has been. And that's been a very deliberate effort on our part. You can see that our rolling ratio has been right around 1%. That means that we're not overfunding the plan, we're not underfunding the plan. We're trying to get to that sweet spot where we see an appropriate level of funding and are able to maintain our level of benefit. So if you take a look at what the trend is, the national trend is about 3% growth, and our trend averaged over time has been, that rolling trend has been about, in that 8-year period that we look at there, is about a 2% growth. So a little bit better than that. Inflation has, of course, been relatively low, so the cost of insurance is still greater than the cost of or the CPI. So below that purple bar, the AAGR is the average annual growth rate. So that's kind of progressing that over time. So the 8-year projection is that our average annual growth rate was 3.7%. That's a little higher than the national, which was 3.2, and a little more than double of what CPI has been. So that gives you an idea of why it continues to be a challenge to fund our benefit program on a go-forward basis, because costs are tending to increase at somewhere around double or a little above that of what's happening with inflation. So everything else in the world is growing by about 1.6%, and medical costs are double or a little bit more than that. This chart just shows how we compare. So Francis Howell is the darker blue line below, and the national average is the teal colored line above. And it shows that we have been trending close to, but always below the national average. So here you can see that the average spend is a little over $13,000, and we're just below $12,000. So we're doing much better than the national trend. Our growth has been at the same level or a little above national, but our costs overall are still a little bit below what happens with the national data. And then the chart below, our expense ratio, you can see that on a year-by-year basis, which is the dark blue line, that has some variability year to year. And that can be influenced by some significant events that take place. You know, a couple of premature babies in a particular plan year can have a pretty dramatic effect in a single year, but luckily those things don't happen every year, and so they get averaged out. And so again, if you look at the purple line on that lower graph, you can see that over time we've really that really has averaged out. Even though there's been some variability year to year, our rolling average tends to be relatively stable. And then if we just take a look at trend over time, again, this shows a little bit more variability for Francis Howell, and that's that dotted line. And I would say that the same idea applies here, is that this reflects the variability that can be introduced on a year-by-year basis based on a large number of high-dollar cases, or we suddenly get an employee who requires a very expensive medication. That has a significant impact in a particular year, but tends to average itself out over time. And so our average annual growth rates, you can see in the lower graph there, that chart, that Francis Howell is a dark blue line, the national is kind of the teal, and the CPI compared to that is in the purple bar. Again, it demonstrates the difficulty of funding our program over time if our expenses continue to increase at twice or more what CPI has been. So I know that's a little geeky, but it does provide, I think it provides some important context. The big takeaways would be this: our medical expense is not growing significantly different than national trends. We are funding our program appropriately because our expense ratio is almost exactly at 1. We continue to face challenges because our expenditures are growing at twice the rate of inflation or a little bit more, and that gets to be a challenge. And that's not just, looking over the 8 years shown here, that's not just 1 year that happened. It is consistently happening that our expenses are growing at a greater rate. And so while we're not out of sync with national, it does place pressure on the organization to continue to fund that program when your inflation, if your revenue is increasing at an inflationary rate, which is what factors into the increases for our property tax revenue, which is well over 50% of our operating revenue, if that's only growing at inflationary rate, and one aspect of your expenses, which is, we spend $20 million a year, that's growing at twice the inflation rate, it gets to be a very difficult equation to solve. So we'll continue to work on it. We've got great people on the committee. We have a great consultant. We do a lot of good things to try to control our costs. But I felt that this information would help people understand when we talk about our benefit program, not just to realize the tremendous value that it is to our employees because they have a very high level of benefit, and realize, relatively speaking, probably less out of pocket than would typically be the case. But we do have to be diligent about continuing to manage it for the reasons that I shared.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Supple. Board, any questions, comments? Okay. Next up, we have our superintendent comments. Dr. Hoven.
Thank you. I think what I'd like to use my time for tonight is just to look ahead to Tuesday when our students will reach their last day of this school year. It's been stated many times throughout the year, but we were the second biggest school district in the state of Missouri to begin fully in person this school year for the families that chose to come, fully virtual for those families that chose it, and remained open for the kids who came to school all year long, 0 building closures. And I think that is absolutely as a result of the efforts of many people involved. Our teachers, our support staff, our other certified staff, our administrators, and the support of our board has enabled us to put a strong plan in place, be able to go through this year, make adjustments as necessary, and be able to have a successful school year that was as close to normal as we could make it. And I'm incredibly proud of the efforts of everyone involved with this district. That's not just the employees and the kids, but the families as well, to be able to do what we did this year. We became an example for districts around the region, looking at us for what we did to make this year successful. You know, it's an experience none of us were prepared for. None of us would have been ready for a pandemic, but what we did to navigate it, I'm incredibly proud of. And now that we can see the end of the school year is upon us, I just want to thank everyone for their efforts this year. I want everyone to hear how much that I personally appreciate everything they have done, all of the efforts, all of the time spent, the long nights and weekends and everything spent working to make this year successful. I just want to thank everyone and let everyone know that I really appreciate what everyone has done to make this work.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Hoven. Board, any comments, request?
I just got two quick things. Number one is it was great as we're starting to get back to normal slowly, that the Facilities Committee had their first meeting in quite some time. Although it was virtual, it was great to see all these faces back, and we had representatives from throughout the district, a variety of roles. It was good to see FHEA there, FISA was there, and it's great to start getting back in the normal flow of items as we go through the district. The other thing I just want to say is, you know, it's been a long year for everybody, and I'm really looking forward to graduation on Saturday, and it'll be a very joyous day for all these kids, for the families, and for our district as a whole. And it's a testament to the work and effort that our administration, Dr. Hoven, Dr. Rumpus, and the rest of the administrative staff, our teachers, and everybody have done to make this a successful year in spite of the trying times. So I will echo Dr. Hoven's remarks and say thank you to everyone.
Okay. Anyone else, board? Okay. Next on our agenda, we have information. Please make sure you take a look at those items. And saying that, I would like a motion to adjourn, board.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Good night, all.